Well, it was a combination of being genuinely interested in researching the Japanese films because there was very little original research being done on them. We knew very little in the United States then. So I had the opportunity to go over, and I took some Japanese classes, and I got a part-time job there. And it was also a chance to get out of the house for the summers. I didn't want to stay home and take an ordinary part-time job. And I hoped that I would be able to meet people, which fortunately I was. I went to Japan originally with the hopes of basically just meeting as many people as I possibly could, but not really expecting that it would be possible, just hoping it would be so. Well, at first it was very intimidating because, after all, I was only 18 years old when I started doing this, and I had never met anyone who worked professionally in film before, let alone someone I admired as much as Ifukube or Honda. But after I did, since the first people I met were Ifukube and Honda, and those were the two giants, everyone else I met after that was less intimidating. And after a while, it almost grew very routine for me. Well, the story about Honda and Tsuburaya is that one reason why the first Godzilla film and all their subsequent collaborations worked so well was because Honda and Tsuburaya simply had the same attitude, a very similar worldview. Tsuburaya was known for being very argumentative with directors, but not with Honda. They never had an argument of any kind that anyone ever witnessed. The book, which I'm currently calling Age of the Gods, is simply a history of the Japanese fantasy film. It's the most intensive ever written in English. With no modesty, I have to say that. There's never been anything on this scale attempted anywhere in English. It's basically, my concentration in college was history, so I'm writing it very much as a history. But I'm writing it chronologically, beginning in 1954 and coming up through Godzilla vs. Destroyer, including notes on the Gamera and the Mijin films and other such films. Well, I can't really pick one, but I would say an interview I did with Ishiro Honda in the summer of 1990, which I also videotaped, that was very exciting. That was one where he really opened up. He was very loose, finally. That was about the third time I met him, and he was very open with me that time. Another interview I also videotaped with Ifukube the same summer, and again the same summer. I met Koichi Kawakita and Kenji Sahara the same day, and then while we were talking to Kenji Sahara, suddenly it turned out that the director of Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster, Yoshimitsu Banno, had been in the same room the entire time, and we didn't even notice. So that was a lot of fun, because it was that was actually 3 generations in the same room. I would like to go back to Japan around the end of January. I have no idea if I'll have the money to do that, but by that time the text of the book will be finished, and there are a few just little bits and pieces of questions that I would like to have answered. One thing I would like very much is to interview a director named Nobuhiko Obayashi, who was Honda's next-door neighbor, and consulted with Honda on a couple of his own films. I would also like to meet Kurosawa. I've been told that it's possible, but the last time I went to Japan, he wasn't in Tokyo, so.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that there's been a rebirth of Godzilla fandom in the United States. I don't think until the last couple of years there's really been one. I would say that G-Con this year was the first real sign of a Godzilla fandom truly existing in this country. I would say that mostly G-Fan before that was the first indication of how large it was. Before that, there was the magazines like a Japanese Fantasy Film Journal, but they came out so infrequently that and they were so hard to find that it was impossible to know how many of us there really were. I wouldn't have said there were this many of us. I don't think it still appeals to adults. I think it's simply that we all grew up with it, and now we happen to be adults. I think a larger question would be if the Godzilla films would really appeal to the next generation of children, and instinctively I would say no, and yet you have things like Mighty Morphin Power Rangers which are crossing over, so perhaps Godzilla is eternal. I think we're very near the peak. It's very hard to say, since there are people calling it. Just at the convention this last summer, there were people coming up who had no idea there were other fans in the first place. Actually, my first Japanese movie was King Kong Escapes. I think my first Godzilla movie was Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster, which is kind of funny because they both came from the same project. Sea Monster was going to be a King Kong film. I think the best Godzilla film is certainly the first one, but the one I find the most enjoyable is probably King Kong vs. Godzilla. On the other hand, I really like Son of Godzilla because that one makes absolutely no demands on you. Well, partly there's a nostalgic appeal to them for me, and they're sort of cathartic, the best ones. Like Monster Zero, I still get a kick out of all the stuff from just the foot coming down over and over again. Well, you have to realize that Ifukube is basically one of the most remarkable composers of the century. That you can't really compare him to anyone. Just the way he writes, the way he approaches things. He's completely self-taught. He had nothing to unlearn, in a sense. He has a remarkable ear, even by Japanese standards. In fact, he's not like any other Japanese composer in the sense that he writes very low music. Most Japanese tend to write sort of in the higher range. There's nothing he doesn't know about orchestration. It's really inconceivable that anyone else could have been successful with the first film. Without him, we wouldn't even have the roar. He created the roar. Well, inasmuch as I am of the opinion that Toho is going to cease production in the next few years, Toho will probably wind up licensing Godzilla to some other production company. And I would hope that this production company has the wherewithal to hire somebody who can actually write a decent director, decent special effects team, bring something really fresh to the character, because that hasn't been done in quite a while. The new cycle of films doesn't really compare to the older films. They're really they're made by completely different schools of thought. You have to realize that the films made by Honda and Tsuburaya were largely in reaction to the Second World War. And the new films, these are people who don't remember the Second World War. So they're just of a completely different school of thought. There's really no comparing them. I don't think the new films are particularly well handled. What's already happening? That the fandom, that we manage to stay together, that the information continues to circulate, that there's this exchange of ideas, and that the videotapes stay available, and everything has to stay out there. Because when I grew up, even if I came into this knowing nothing now, just the idea of something like GFan would have been remarkable to me.